Alright, hello everyone, and welcome to the Hateful Truth video game review series where I give you maximum truth and minimum bullshit regarding the latest video game releases, and I'm excited today to be talking about the game that we're talking about, the new spiritual successor to the Dark Souls line, the Demon Souls line, the games that many people have grown huge fans of. It's become almost a rabid fan base, right? Of people who love games with this crippling difficulty, unforgiving gameplay, and the fact that this game kind of retained that, took it into the next gen of consoles, and kind of took us into the gaming future. Ladies and gentlemen, Bloodborne, which is a PS4 exclusive, right? Probably, admittedly, over the past year and a half, we've been waiting for a game that's a PS4 exclusive that's kind of like a must-play game. And I'm here to review the game. I'm going to tell you what I liked about it, what I didn't like about it, my thoughts about the plot, which I think is actually one of the more interesting things about the game, okay? And I do have some big positives and negatives about the game that I do want to share with you, and then my overall thoughts. And then I'm going to tell you what I think for the common gamer, and also for people who are fans of this series, so that you have an idea of what I think who's going to like it and who's not, okay? So, Bloodborne. Again, think Dark Souls, Demon Souls, crippling levels of difficulty. A game that really doesn't give you too much of a tutorial in the realm of what you're supposed to be doing, learning how to use different weapons or anything like that. A game where an enemy can literally come around the corner at any point and insta-kill you. Or there could be a wrong step to the left or right, a booby trap that ends up killing you. That's the point of Bloodborne. Crippling difficulty, but through perseverance, you survive, you conquer, and you get this accomplished feeling when you finally beat the game. And that being said, Bloodborne does follow in the footsteps of Demon Souls and Dark Souls in that regard. In fact, a lot of people say it's actually a lot better than last year's outing of Dark Souls 2, which was actually my #2 game of the year for 2014. So admittedly, I'm a big fan of the series, and I'm going to like a lot of stuff about the series that others might not like, including the fact that the game is so difficult, the fact that it doesn't hold your hand, the fact that really once you learn the game engine, you can kind of start to survive and free flow through the game versus one of the games where the game kind of holds your hands and doesn't really throw too much at you until maybe later levels of the game. This game wants you to fail, but also wants you to persevere, and that's the point of this game series, okay? Bloodborne a little bit different than the Dark Souls line in that you cannot really defend in any effective way. In the Dark Souls series, a lot of times you can have this class where you can have a big tanky-like character with a big shield. Not so in Bloodborne. In Bloodborne, you don't have a shield. Actually, there is a shield. It's kind of a joke. You have a gun, and the gun is used for parries. So what is a parry? It's basically when an enemy is about to attack you, if you time your gunshot at the right moment, the enemy will kind of be frozen. The game actually makes a noise, a sound effect when you do it, which then leads to an incredibly powerful, what they call visceral attack in this game, where you can do a ton of damage because they're stunned, similar to Dark Souls. We used to be able to backstab an opponent. Remember that? You get behind them and do kind of a sneak attack that did tons of damage. You can also do that in Bloodborne by charging your heavy attack and releasing it at the right moment and then following again with a visceral attack while the opponent is stunned. So no real defense. It's more about dodging and being nimble, being able to side roll, backdash, new evasive maneuvers that were added to Bloodborne that make it, in my opinion, a little bit more action-packed than the previous Dark Souls games in the series. I like the graphic design, the art design, and the overall kind of design of the game. You start out in these gothic, dark towns that are incredibly detailed, and they definitely show off the graphical capabilities of the PlayStation 4 game engine. You're fighting these townspeople that just seem deranged, and next thing you know, now you're fighting werewolves. Later on, you're fighting mutant bugs. You're fighting giant mutated rats in the sewers, almost undead-like creatures, and you're like, all right, I see a lot of parallels to Dark Souls, but minor spoiler alert, if you're planning on playing Bloodborne and haven't even touched it yet and you're watching a review, later on it's revealed that these are not the core characters of the Bloodborne universe. There's a far more sinister thing going on behind the scenes. And this actually leads to a critical new gameplay element called Insight, by which as you fight new bosses, enter new areas, especially the optional secret areas that you don't necessarily need to go to complete the game and actually maybe are a little bit off the beaten path to find, you have a meter called Insight that will raise during the course of the game. Now, you may notice that you can use Insight at kind of this main hub, just like all the Dark Souls games. There's a main hub where there's vendors and stuff. You can buy items with it. That's great. But the real use of Insight is to see things that normally you wouldn't see in the universe, and also to make the game more difficult. So the more you play Bloodborne, and the more that you do, the more optional content you do, the more optional bosses you fight, the more stuff you'll actually begin to see. And in addition to that, the harder the game will get. You'll notice that a normal enemy who was really easy before, when you go back to that area, if you have a higher insight level, all of a sudden it has a new attack, or actually does double damage compared to what it used to. Bosses become more aggressive with the higher insight levels that you have. So it's very interesting that they added this game mechanic that even if you grind in the game and you do all the optional content, the game kind of scales in difficulty to where you're at. Now, admittedly, not 100%. Grinding is something that's always been around in the Souls games. It is present here in Bloodborne, and yes, there are a few choke points in the game where I found you could incredibly easily, repetitively grind and gain tons and tons of levels, leading to you having a more overpowered character. But for the most part, you're going to kind of almost screw yourself if you do that, because as you go into other areas, you're going to find, okay, I mowed through the earlier parts of the game, but as I go to the harder parts of the game, my insight level was so high that everything's much tougher now, and even though I seem to be over-leveled, I'm dying with 1 to 2 hits anyway, so it kind of evens itself out in that regard. In particular, the leveling system of Bloodborne is a lot more streamlined than that of Dark Souls. If you remember, the Dark Souls and Demon Souls universes had like 20, 30 stats. And you'd be, oh, do I need to be Hex or you know, White Magic Cleric, Priest, whatever that level is? Do I need in Vitality or Endurance or Stamina or this or that? And there were so many different things to level up that it could become incredibly confusing to the non-versed gamer. Here, they've really streamlined the leveling engine to what I feel is a little bit better. You could decide if you want to have magical abilities kind of imbued in your weapons and go that way, or you could decide to go a more physical way. The weapons in the game are awesome. They transform, and so you can have a blade that's a quick attack, and then you turn it into a giant bastard sword. You could have a cane that at first is a little kind of striking cane, but then turns into a giant bullwhip, and if you level up the right stats during the course of the game, it'll become incredibly more powerful and effective. So there's a lot of variety in the gameplay of the game as you start to find these hidden weapons and items, and by the way, I have to say, they were a lot easier for me to find in this game than they were in other games. Even though they were still hidden, don't get me wrong, sometimes if you kill a certain boss, or you do a certain objective, or you find a certain secret item, you'll get a badge that allows you to go buy these better weapons and items back at a vendor. For the most part, I found them. In fact, I did find them all with only basically looking up one that I couldn't find. Everything else I found naturally during the course of the game. Compare that to like Dark Souls, where you really have to go out of your way to even find half the stuff in the game. So, variety of gameplay. You're going to be going through gothic towns. You're going to be going through evil poison forests. You're going to be going to choirs and cathedrals. You're going to be going to mystical, other dimensional lakes. You're going to be fighting such a wide variety of enemies, and I don't want to spoil. Most people who review this game will spoil the plot twist at the end, where about 2/3 through the game you find out not everything is as it seems, and everything is kind of revealed to you, and you're like, holy shit, this wasn't a game just about werewolves and monsters. It's kind of the opposite of the Order 1886. Now, for those of you who saw my review or my playthrough of that game, you know how pissed I was that the game had so little gameplay and advertised itself as a monster hunting game when all you did was kill generic enemies the whole game. This is the opposite. It advertised itself as a monster hunting game, but ended up opening itself up to a whole new world of what the fuck horrors by the end of the game, and you're like, wow, that's incredibly cool that they did that. I'm glad it was a bait and switch, and it wasn't just what was on the surface of the advertisement campaign, and that's the real sign of a good game. A game that you can go through and find tons of hidden content and play, and at the end of the game say, wow, that was a cool hidden twist, versus a game you're like, it's over already, and 90% of the time I was bored as fuck because it was repetitive and generic. Not so with Bloodborne, okay? Now, there are multiplayer aspects as well. You're going to have the ability to summon someone and help you in certain areas, just like you used to be able to in the Dark Souls games, and you're also going to have the ability to have PvP in certain areas. There were a couple times during my playthrough of the game where people just naturally were summoned by these bell-ringing women who were in these stages hidden, and once you kill the woman, then no one else can be summoned to that area, and it kind of artificially inflates the difficulty of certain areas of the game. But at the same time, it was never so annoying where, like, there was infinite amount of people being spawned and I was like, fuck, now I can't progress with the game, which actually was a problem in certain areas of previous Dark Souls games. The co-op is similar to previous Dark Souls games where it basically increases the difficulty of the game. If you want to do cooperative, it's 1.5 times the difficulty. So, you know, they'll have an extra 50% health added to their life bar and do 50% more damage if you have a co-op partner with you. So even though it makes the game a little easier, at the same time, the game makes it harder. So it's a fun aspect. If you have a friend who you want to do co-op with, it's definitely something to consider. It really wasn't anything that I checked out during the playthrough because I really wanted to see what I could do solo. And that being said, I was able, through grinding, but also through perseverance. I'd say probably by the second half of the game, the grinding that I had done early in the game didn't even matter anymore. And most people like the fact that even though I was over-leveled, supposedly, I was still dying because of instant deaths and things you wouldn't expect. It took me about, I'd say, between 20 to 30 hours to beat the main campaign of Bloodborne. And keep in mind, I did everything. I did every secret area. I did every optional boss. I think there was one exception where there was one NPC that I never found, who, if I had attacked him, would have turned into an optional boss. But it was good I didn't find him, because if you find him, sometimes he screws you over and ends up screwing up other quest lines. So I was glad I didn't do that. But outside of that, I did everything, including finding the 3 secret items needed to get the true ending of the game and fight the true final boss of the game, which honestly, visually was very appealing, but was very underwhelming. I'm not going to show you a clip of it because I don't want to spoil, although everyone's probably already seen it if they wanted to. The true ending of the game makes sense if you read the lore. Meaning, in this game, just like in previous Dark Souls games, there's no one who holds your hand and says, this is the story of the game. But if you read the descriptions of all the items you're finding during the game, including armor sets and badges and stuff like that, it will actually make sense by the end. And I got the true ending, while other people were kind of like, I don't get it. I've actually heard other YouTubers were like, I don't get it. It's a shitty ending. I understood it 100%, and if you're paying attention during the game, you will get it, and it is a pretty decent ending. The game actually has 3 endings, but it is kind of a cop-out. What I mean by that is you say, oh, there's replayability, right? I could replay the game 3 times and get 3 different endings. Not really. Basically, at the end of the game, you have a choice. Yes, no, or say no, but also have the 3 secret items so that you can get the true final boss fight and the true ending, which is really freaking annoying, because if you didn't know that and you say no, you don't get the true ending anyway. But really, there's no difference between the endings, although the game gives you a full trophy for each one, so it really makes you kind of replay the game 3 times. A lot of people said, oh, cheat the game and do a cloud save and reload the cloud save. I didn't bother with all that. Outside of that main campaign of the game, there are what are called optional chalice dungeons. Now, if you don't know what that is, you might have gone through the whole game and never figured out what the hell they were. By finding hidden items throughout the campaign of Bloodborne, or by buying certain items from a vendor using that insight that I told you about that you accrue during the course of the game, you actually can have rituals performed on these altars in your, your hub town, and those rituals will warp you to optional dungeons. Now, there's 2 kinds. There's regular, and then there's the root dungeons. Regular dungeons are pre-designed by From Software, and they are very repetitive. They all kind of look the same, but you're going to be fighting new enemy types. You're going to be fighting new bosses that are kind of buffed up versions of previous characters from the game, or in some cases, completely unique. And yes, those bosses actually do significantly add to the story of Bloodborne, especially in certain fights. There's dialogue that's spoken during the fights. Sometimes you're like, whoa, who the hell is this character? You get an item from them, you read the description, and it gives you more background. So even though it's optional to completing the main game, you could still do it for more content. If you do all of the chalice dungeons, it could probably take you, I kid you not, 20 more hours of gameplay, because there's other dungeons called root dungeons that are completely randomly generated and different for everyone. In fact, as you continue on these dungeons, I was like level 110, I believe, by the end, and even I couldn't beat them. There's a dungeon called the Defiled Dungeon where it halves your HP for the whole dungeon, and there's bosses that will insta-kill you with 1 fucking hit, forcing you to say, damn, if I'm going to beat this, I even needed to play it for like 45 minutes to learn the boss pattern and pray I never get hit, or I need to go grind repetitively to have more levels so I have enough health so I don't die with 1 hit. I threw in the towel after about 6 hours of Chalice Dungeons gameplay. There is a secret, super secret boss at the end of the Chalice Dungeons that actually is a character that appears in the main campaign of the game of Bloodborne, but I didn't get to it because it's too much for me, and that's actually one of the gripes I have with the game, is that replayability is great, and especially if you love the core campaign gameplay of Bloodborne, and you love the gameplay aspect, not the exploration, but the gameplay itself, you'll probably like the Chalice Dungeons, but the majority of people are probably going to get bored and say, this is really just repetitive grinding, and when do I get to the payoff, and one real secret boss fight to get this final trophy so you can get your platinum. may not be the payoff that a lot of people are looking for. In my case, I knew I was running out of time to play the game. I didn't want to play it another ridiculous amount of hours to get to the boss, and I threw the towel in. I said, I know what the challenge dungeons are now. I can add them into the replayability when I give my review, but I don't want to go the extra mile, okay? So, Bloodborne in a nutshell. Think of it as Dark Souls plus, is what I would like to say. A lot of evolution on the Dark Souls series with the better combat, more dodging, no real tanking combat, but more reactionary, which adds it to being more fast-paced, the wide variety of weapons, the much improved visuals, the improved leveling system. Yes, a ton of freaking bosses. I believe there's over 20 bosses total in the game, not counting the challenge dungeons. The hidden areas that you don't need to go to with hidden bosses, great armor sets and stuff like that. Everything that you would expect from the Dark Souls series is here. And most people are saying it's probably one of their favorite games, if not their favorite game in the Dark Souls series. I would actually say, comparing everything I've seen in Demon Souls, Dark Souls 2, and Bloodborne, I would probably say Bloodborne by far is better than Dark Souls 2. Even though I really liked that game last year, I think that this game overall, with the improvements they made to it, the graphical improvements, is better. The one thing they didn't fix, which it gives me a headache, the camera is still screwed up. And I said this earlier on when I did a first reactions video, and I'll say it here in the review. You will have the camera locked onto certain enemies, bosses, whatever. And if they walk towards you and the wall is to your back, the camera gets stuck between your character or the boss, and you can't fucking see anything. You can't tell if you need to dodge, attack, you can't even see where you are. You just see an up-close sprite in your face, and you don't know what's going on. That's the one thing, for whatever reason, they never fixed. Why didn't From Software put an option so if the fucking camera's getting squished in the corner, it can rotate so you see where the fuck you are and you could dodge out of the way? It's like a no-brainer that I could have figured out in 5 seconds of playtesting, but they still didn't put that into the game. It will lead to more cheap deaths. In fact, it led to multiple cheap deaths in my playthrough where I literally died because I couldn't fucking see anything. But I've learned to kind of accept that with From Software because every fucking game they made in this series has that problem, alright? I think the game is better than Dark Souls 2 due to the variety of gameplay, the better weapons, better bosses, the much better story, okay? I think the game is actually slightly better than Demon Souls, the original game, because of these improvements about having shortcuts and lamps instead of bonfires, so better checkpoint system. Again, better gameplay by far when it comes to combat than Demon Souls. I think, for me, it's almost a tie with Dark Souls 1. Dark Souls 1 had, like, the biggest world, the most variety of content, crazy kind of variety in the bosses. The ending didn't really make sense for me, but then again, I wasn't reading up on all the lore like I was in Bloodborne, so maybe it would have made sense to me. But that game kind of opened my eyes, and I said, wow, this game really is an amazing masterpiece when you look at it big picture. And that's kind of how I feel, knowing that I've seen everything in Bloodborne. Wow, you know, that is awesome, and I can't wait. I hope there's DLCs, because I would love to play some DLCs for Bloodborne, because I felt bad after 2.5 weeks finally completing the story of the game, and I was kind of like, damn, it sucks that it's over, because I'm craving more. I wish there was another 5 hours of story-based gameplay with new optional bosses and stuff. It would have been really awesome, but they did a great job. From Software knew what they were doing. They teamed up with Sony Japan Studio to put out this game. It's a masterpiece. It's definitely the best Dark Souls game since Dark Souls 1. I give Bloodborne, for fans of the series, I give Bloodborne a 9.5 out of 10. By far, it's my favorite game of the year of 2015 so far. Keep in mind, we're only about a third into the year, and we've got a lot of greater games coming out. Just in the next couple of months, we got some good games coming out that I think could possibly top this one. But for now, my favorite game of the year, really enjoyed the hell out of it as a fan of the Souls series. If I weren't a fan of the Souls series, I would probably say you're not going to get it unless you're willing to invest tons of time and effort into learning a game engine. You understand you're going to die 5 zillion effing times. There will be incredibly cheap deaths. If you can get by all that and persevere, you're going to love the game. I get the feeling there's a wide variety of players out there who aren't of that mindset and who won't like the game because of it. And for you, you might say the game's like a 6 or a 7 just because you recognize the amount of content, but it's too fucking difficult for you to grasp. That's okay. Not every game has to appeal to every gamer. And when I say this game's a 9.5, it doesn't mean that if you don't like it, that you're in the wrong. And I hate when game reviewers fucking do that because it's bullshit. There's going to be games that appeal to different audiences. A fan will like this game. A person who's not a fan of the Souls games, unless you're willing to dedicate time and experience to it, you're not going to like it. Don't feel bad because you own a PS4 and you didn't buy the big PS4 exclusive because it's not your cup of tea. You shouldn't. It's your right as a gamer to choose the games that you like, and understand that you can skip this if you don't like this really sharp difficulty spike in games, okay? But I liked it. 9.5 out of 10. Can't recommend it more. Bloodborne, my favorite game of the year so far. Definitely going to be a game of the year contender. I hope they can keep this series now at this level of quality and not dip off, because that would be awesome now that we actually have an awesome PlayStation 4 exclusive franchise. Very good. Alright everyone, that is it for the Hateful Truth review of Bloodborne. I hope that you feel I give you maximum truth and minimum bullshit regarding that release. I hope that now you can judge for yourself whether or not you want to check it out, especially if you're a PS4 owner and you've been on the fence because it is a PS4 exclusive. Thanks a lot everyone. I'll see you next time for another game review. Peace out.